I tell the kids that about the prayer, one hand's heaven, one hand's earth, and when you pray. And I remembered one of my professors. I asked him, well, when I'm preaching hands like this a lot, what does that mean? He says, you're holding your own hand, you're nervous. Nothing to do with heaven and earth. But that's what I want to talk about on this very official beginning of summer. But Memorial Day is more than just a 3-day weekend and our chance to get the year's first sunburn. It is remembering the men and women who gave the ultimate sacrifice for freedom, whose lives were more significant than speech, and whose death was a poem the music of which can never be sung. I hate it when stores have special deals on Memorial Day or a Memorial Weekend, as if all it means is an opportunity for a sale. It's like having a sale on Good Friday. This year I remember seeing on Facebook a display at a Walmart store somewhere in the nation, it wasn't here, and it was a display of Calvary. You know, the 3 crosses on the hill, far away, Calvary, and it was all made out of 12-pack Coke boxes. I had no words. Did you see that too? Yes. Ascension Day, which was last week, but we're recognizing it today. Ascension Day is Jesus' Memorial Day. It is when the Jesus of Nazareth was mysteriously, miraculously engulfed into the eternal Christ of heaven. There's a lot of theology in that one sentence right there. He, the Creator, who had descended so far and given up so much, was now heading home, like a soldier returning across the ocean from a long and bloody war. Home at last. Our readings say Jesus was carried up into heaven, lifted up in a cloud. A cloud took him. Now, if this happened in Los Angeles, it might make sense to our contemporary minds. Jesus got lost in the smog. But a cloud, and this, by the way, is not the cloud that you store your computer documents and movies and stuff. Is Luke giving us an eyewitness account of what really happened? Did Jesus really make a vertical takeoff? Is he still orbiting the earth? Or did he escape the gravitational pull floating in infinity and space? Is heaven up there like Mount Olympus, like the land of Oz, like Club Med for angels? I don't think so. The biblical writers weren't stupid. The cloud that Luke mentions in his account, the cloud is an Old Testament symbol for God's presence. You may remember a pillar of cloud led the Hebrews out of Egypt in slavery. It was a cloud that covered Mount Sinai and shook the mountain because God was there and God spoke to Moses and to the people. To the ancient Jews, the temple, which Solomon built in Jerusalem, and then Herod revitalized it, reconstructed it, the temple was the meeting place between heaven and earth, where the Lord's presence descended in a cloud in the Holy of Holies and spoke and ministered to and among the people. The cloud is God's presence. So when Luke tells us that a cloud took Jesus from their sight, he's not talking about a vertical liftoff into space, like beam me up, Scotty. He's telling us Jesus is moving from one dimension of God's creation to another. Jesus is now the presence of God. The man of earth is the God of heaven. One. In the Bible, heaven and earth are ways of talking about God's space and our space. Our space we know really well. There are trees, and there are streams, and there are mountains, and there's Blue Hat coffee and cheesecake, old Chevy Impalas. But when it comes to God's space, it gets a little fuzzy. So the biblical writers gave us images and metaphors to help us understand, like harps and streets of gold and a mansion and white robes, crown of jewels, God's own throne. These are all images. And though heaven and earth are different types of spaces, Jesus talked so much about how these two spaces are not separate, always separate, but they kind of mesh together. Kind of like if earth were blue and heaven was yellow, then when they overlapped, they make the color green. Go green. Look for green. Life's all about finding green. Create the green. That's what it's about. And I also imagine most of you U of M fans hate me right now. God's space and our space intersecting, overlapping, like when Christy and I are out dancing together, cheek to cheek. Which is why we can talk about our loved ones who have gone before us to heaven, but yet they still remain among us. When I was 17, after my mother's funeral, I dreamed that she appeared to me, and she asked me if I wanted her to make a spaghetti dinner, spaghetti for supper. My mother wasn't that good of a cook, so that was a surprising question for her to ask me. She made everything in a cast iron frying pan. Everything. Oatmeal, hot dogs, everything. She had one method. You burn the life and nutrients out of everything. Then you serve it. You know that old joke about at our house we use the fire alarm as the oven timer? Well, that was our house. That's where it originated. So it was surprising that she asked me that. It was actually quite weird. But I remember she appeared so beautiful in my dream. She was thin and young looking. She had black hair. It was wonderful. And later that day, it wasn't even 8 hours later that day, someone from church knocked on our door and handed my grieving dad a plate of spaghetti. And it wasn't burned. That was a moment when heaven and earth overlapped. A green moment. And I'm sure you have your experiences too. So then Jesus told his disciples to wait while he returns to his Father, to ascend up to his Father, which left the apostles wondering, when are you coming back? How soon will you be back? Will you be coming again? Should I quit my job? Should I cash in my 401k? Should I buy green bananas? How soon are you coming back? And Jesus answered in a very complex Greek sentence that basically said, it's none of your business. Now I'm thinking of the second coming. And the second coming, just a side note, the second coming is very personal for us. Jesus came to earth the first time as a baby in Bethlehem. Jesus comes again a second time when Jesus comes into your life. A second coming. A far more important arrival than some future magical moment in the sky. It's enough for me to believe that someday heaven and earth will be one. The world is headed somewhere, and that we are in Christ. Christ is in us, present now and here. And if I'm wrong, if there is some kind of a rapture, a word, incidentally, that does not appear in the New Testament, then I'll be caught by surprise by doing God's work, and that's not a bad thing. The Bible's message is about union between heaven and earth, which, of course, is the kingdom of God. Heaven does its work in our world. They intermingle, they interlock, they touch one another. And I want to look just briefly at the Lord's Prayer. But first it reminds me of two politicians, a Republican and a Democrat. And they were debating in a town meeting. And the Democrat said, "You talk so much about religious freedom, my Republican friend. I'll bet you $20 you couldn't even recite the Lord's Prayer." The Republican said, "You're on. he cleared his throat, and he began, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." And the Democrat handed him $20. He said, "I didn't think you could do it." Now, I hope that wasn't offensive because it was very bipartisan and equally demeaning. So anyway, the Lord's Prayer. Jesus said, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." That's the message. The overlapping of heaven and earth. Green. It's what the Garden of Eden was in the beginning. Two spaces, heaven and earth, as one. Green. And the church, you and me, have a job to do to continue his work of bringing heaven and earth together. It's that simple. For example, a few years ago, this family in our community fell on hard times during the recession. Dad lost his job, mom had some health problems, the kids needed to eat, so the churches got together, all the churches got together, and they filled their van with groceries. I mean, the van was like 2 inches from the cement when they drove away. My friend in Grand Rapids, he saw this woman walking down the road with 2 shopping carts. She's pushing one and pulling the other one. And they're full of stuff. They were in the church parking lot watching. And after a couple of times, he went over and asked, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, we live right down the street and we're moving 2 blocks down this street to a new place." And he pulled out his car keys and he said, "Here, take my car, use my car." She said, "No one's ever trusted me like that." Finally, I read about these 2 kids, somewhere in Wisconsin, who asked their dad if they could place a menorah in their window because it was the middle of Hanukkah. Dad said yes. So little Isaac and little Rachel, they set it up. And later that night, some hateful person threw a brick through the living room window. But thankfully, nobody was hurt by shattered glass. Dad called the police the next morning and talked to the FBI. And Dad asked, "What should I do?" And the FBI told him, "Don't put a menorah in the window." The local church heard about this, and soon menorahs began appearing in windows all over the city. After Target sold out of menorahs, they passed out paper ones to tape in the windows. Little Isaac commented after seeing all the menorahs, "There sure are a lot of Jews in this town." Every time we are generous, every time we give value to someone else, every time we stand up for the justice of all people, we bring heaven and earth together. Don't you want to see more of that? Don't you want to be part of that? I do. Isn't that what Jesus calls us to do? It's not easy being green, as Kermit said, but Jesus didn't call us to take the easy road. So let's not stand around looking up at the sky with our mouths open like the apostles did that day. Let's not stand around debating and arguing and judging about who's in and who's going to be left behind, like a lot of religious programs do on TV and radio. I mean, that's real helpful. Not when there's real work to do. Let's show the world where Jesus is, right here, and that we are his church, a living memorial. Amen.